100 meters from the river banks must be similarly vacated. It is only the factories that are already built in what used to be wetlands that will be kept. Because the factories are very expensive and we need them. But no new ones, no new factories must be built or licensed to be built in wetlands. Even those that were erroneously licensed by UIA, but where the construction had not yet started, should be allocated alternative land. The environmental authorities may permit well-organized residential houses and hotels near the lake shore or the river banks which observe environmental rules, e.g. planting grass and trees so that there are no bare patches of soil from which the omkoka, the mtunga, the runoff water, would pick soil to silt the water bodies. There should be no cultivation or slums near the water bodies. However, residential houses built in the wetlands must be demolished. Water is not only important for air, life support and food generation, but also enables us to generate electricity, hydroelectricity. As far as the rivers are concerned, Uganda is both a downstream and an upstream country. These words mean downstream means where the rivers are going. Upstream is where the rivers are coming from. So Uganda is both. It is both an upstream. There are rivers which start here, but also it is a downstream because there are rivers which come here from other African countries. According to our water people, 14 billion cubic meters of water per year that Uganda gets come from rivers, comes from rivers that originate from Uganda, while 29 billion cubic meters of water comes from rivers that we share with other sister countries. Given the political fragmentation that we try to heal by regional integration, we cannot always guarantee the proper management of the rivers and their catchment areas that spring from the brother countries vis-à-vis soil erosion, silting, etc. However, we should set the good example by correctly managing the water bodies within our jurisdiction. We will then have the moral authority to approach the brother African countries about the shared rivers. I therefore demand that all these encroaching on the wetlands in the manner mentioned above vacate those sites as laid out above. The rivers like Ruizi, Mpanga, Mayanja, Kafu, Aswa, Agago, Mporogoma, Mubuku, and their tributary wetlands must be fully protected from those uninformed encroachers. This will ensure that all our 14 billion cubic meters of internal waters is safe, and then we can additionally interact with the brother countries about the 29 billion cubic meters of water from them. Remember that we are mandated by common sense and by the international law that we must share the water generated in Uganda and what we get from the brother upstream countries with the downstream brother countries, which are South Sudan, Sudan, Khartoum, and Egypt. Of course, water should not be a problem for Africa because the river Congo alone produces 3,000 billion cubic meters of water per annum. Our wonderful Nile at Khartoum only has 85 billion cubic meters per annum. It is this much smaller quantity of water that some of the actors in the Nile Valley spend so much time quarreling over. Yet the Congo River is equal to 35 Nile rivers in terms of water. If only Congo was stable and Afro-oriented, I imagine that Africa would not be talking about lack of water. Every second, this huge amount of water of the River Congo is feeding the Atlantic Ocean. Who told you that the Atlantic Ocean is thirsty for water? It is Africa that is thirsty for a vision. With these eight successes guaranteed. Because you remember that's how we started. Barekanga biwa Sunday kukola, bakola beta Sunday kukola, namu matagari muwo. They left and done what they ought to have done, and they did other things. We are now telling you these are the things to do, the 8. With these 8, success is guaranteed. It is these that we should work on and ignore the noise of those that live and done what they ought to have done and do that they ought not to have done, and there is no truth in them. Ugandans should not waste time worrying about aid, about loans, etc. We do not need most of these loans. We happily work with all the countries in the world that respect our sovereignty. That is how the UN system should operate. No country should interfere in the internal affairs of another country. That is why we separate foreign affairs from internal affairs. Why should anybody catapult his values through foreign affairs into the internal affairs of another country? Human needs are similar: food, shelter, clothing, mobility, poverty, etc. However, their management evolves differently and at different speeds in the different countries. It is wrong to try to export systems and values, or to export revolution, new ideas, or export counter-revolution, old ideas. This was the mistake of the Pope when Protestantism rose up. You remember when there was a split in the church, some of the church tried to use violence to suppress the other people, which led to wars. I think they were called the 30 Years' Wars, the religious wars. It was a waste of time. It was the mistake of Metternich when capitalism came on the scene. This Metternich was a prime minister of Austria-Hungary. And when the capitalists took over power in France, he tried to overthrow them. And he caused so much problem for Europe. And I think that's how Austria-Hungary broke up. Mistake of Napoleon when he tried to export the ideas of the French Revolution. The mistake of the Western intervention powers against Bolshevik communism in Russia. The mistake of the imperialist countries trying to maintain neo-colonialism in Africa, like the killing of Patrice Lumumba or the killing of Salvador Allende in Chile. If you think that your ideas are correct, read the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 5, verse 16. It says, "Let your light shine so shine before men that they see your good deeds and praise your Father in heaven." That's what it says. If you know you are right, don't try to use force and pressure to change people. Just show your good example and we copy it. In other words, influence people by your good examples and not by coercion. Those actors who try to interfere in the internal affairs of other countries overestimate themselves and underestimate the capacity of the people of the world and their ability to defend their legitimate interests. Those actors are also uninformed. The imperialist actors used the gap in history following when the Ottoman Turks captured Constantinople in 1453, while the peoples of Africa, Asia, and Latin America were not mobilized. They took that advantage to control much of the world. However, two phenomena outside the control of the imperialists marked the beginning of the counter-offensive by the colonized peoples of the world. One phenomenon was the coming to power in Russia of the communists in 1917. This was a social force in a semi-modern big country that had no interest in colonizing other people of the world. Marshal of the Soviet Union Gorgy Zhukov, in his book Reminiscences and Reflections on page 267, writes as follows. This is in quotes. Let me recall a set of facts which, when reported to Stalin, were likely to heighten his distrust for the above warning. I mean the secret negotiations with Nazi Germany in London in 1939, precisely when Britain, France, and USSR were holding military talks in Moscow. British diplomats were offering the Nazis an agreement on dividing the spheres of influence on a world scale. The British Minister of Trade, Hudson, said during his talks with a Nazi called something, Wartat, a Nazi Privy Councillor, close to Field Marshal Goering, that three extensive regions offering unlimited opportunities of economic activity, the British Empire, China, and Russia, were open to the two countries. These people are proposing to share the world, proposing to the Russians, but the Russians rejected it. Why do you want to share the world? Why do you want to share other people? You can't be clever when you think like that. Eh? You can share cows, you can share goats, but to share people. Why do you want to share? Spheres of influence. Who are you? When Hitler tried to offer the Soviet Union to discuss the idea of dividing the world in spheres of influence, he encountered a sharp and unequivocal refusal of the Soviet side, which would not even hear of the subject. The imperialist actors did not pay heed to this just stand, and inter-imperialist rivalry soon plunged the globe into the catastrophe of the Second World War, where the Soviet Union played the major role of defeating fascist Germany and Japan. The anti-imperialist camp grew when the communists took control of another big country, China, in 1949. In fact, one clever American general, Omar Bradley, aptly described the involvement of the Western countries in the Korean War as, in quotes, a wrong war at a wrong time, in a wrong place, with the wrong enemy. So, those who want to control the world, this was their first problem. These big countries which were taken over by people who didn't believe, who didn't share their view. The second phenomenon was the founding of the ANC, the African National Congress, by the broad sections of the African peoples in South Africa to spearhead the resistance of the African people